When you choose silence over reaction, people start to pay attention. It's not because you've said something profound, it's because you've stopped talking altogether. That space you create when you don't engage in drama or explain yourself over and over again becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, others begin to see their own behavior more clearly. Silence forces reflection in a way that words often don't. It challenges people to wonder what's changed. Why isn't she chasing? Why isn't she fighting to be heard? And in that wondering, they begin to realize that your silence isn't passive, it's powerful. It's not about ignoring someone, it's about choosing your peace over chaos. That's when the shift begins. We often confuse silence with weakness, like we're giving up or backing down. But real strength is when you can stay grounded in who you are without needing to prove it to anyone. When you argue with someone who's trying to push your buttons, you're giving them your energy. When you constantly justify your feelings to someone who doesn't care to understand them, you're draining yourself. Silence is restraint, not surrender. It's you saying, I no longer invest in what doesn't serve me. And that choice shifts the entire dynamic. Suddenly, you're not the one seeking validation. You're the one valuing yourself. And that shift is magnetic. People start to notice when your energy changes, even when your words don't. Most people are loud when they feel insecure and unseen. They need to be heard, acknowledged, chosen. But when you know your worth, that urgency disappears. You become less interested in proving yourself and more interested in protecting your peace. Silence, then, becomes a filter. It shows you who truly values you and who only responds when you're giving more than you should. And those who once thrived on your overgiving, they become uncomfortable because your silence reveals what they never wanted to admit, that they only felt powerful when you felt small. So now, in your silence, you rise. Not because you've changed them, but because you've reclaimed you. We live in a world where everything is loud, opinions, emotions, reactions, but the real transformation begins when you choose to go inward. When you step back, reflect, and realign, you become more intentional with your words, your time, and your presence. That silence isn't a void, it's a sanctuary. It's where you learn to heal without needing others to see your wounds. It's where you rediscover your voice, not for them, but for yourself. And when you finally speak again, you're not reacting from pain, you're responding from power. That's what silence builds. It builds clarity, maturity, and unshakable self-respect. And the world starts to feel your presence more in your absence than it ever did in your effort. People often ask, but if I don't say something, won't they just forget me? Here's the truth. If your silence makes someone forget you, they were never really holding you in the first place. Your value is not in how loud you shout it, it's in how you embody it. And when you silently walk away from situations, relationships, or conversations that drain you, you're not being forgotten. You're being remembered for your strength. You teach people how to treat you by what you stop accepting. Not with dramatic exits, not with emotional breakdowns, but with calm distance. That distance shows you've evolved, and that kind of evolution. It speaks volumes without a single word. Silence is also about discipline. It's resisting the temptation to react to every message, every insult, every breadcrumb of attention. It's choosing to respond later, or not at all, because your peace matters more than their moment of chaos. That's not emotional detachment, that's emotional maturity. You begin to learn that not everything requires your voice, not every battle is worth your presence, and the more you lean into this quiet strength, the more centered you become. You don't lose your voice, you gain control over it. You don't lose your power, you sharpen it, and people start to sense that your silence isn't confusion, it's confidence. And here's what's fascinating. When you become silent, people's behavior gets louder. They start reaching out, they start explaining, they start feeling the void you once filled, and sometimes that silence you kept. It says more than 1,000 conversations ever could. It says, I'm done repeating myself. It says, I've given you enough access to me. It draws the line without raising your voice, because the person who needs to be convinced won't stay, and the person who truly values you won't need to be chased, so the silence becomes a boundary, a bold, unapologetic one. And boundaries are the language of self-worth. When you're silent, you give yourself space to listen, not to others, but to yourself. You start to hear the thoughts and feelings you've buried under constant interaction. You notice what really matters to you, what you've tolerated for too long, and where your energy truly belongs. That awareness is priceless. It gives you the power to move differently, to make choices that align with your peace, not your fear of being alone. And from that space, your life starts to shift. You stop pleasing, you stop over-explaining, you stop shrinking, and the best part, you begin to attract people and situations that match the new frequency you've tapped into. Don't underestimate the message your silence sends. When you stop engaging in patterns that hurt you, you're telling the world that you're no longer available for pain disguised as love. You're no longer available for confusion disguised as mystery. That stillness becomes your declaration of self-love. You no longer need chaos to feel alive. You don't need drama to feel desired. You start realizing that your presence is the gift, and your absence is the lesson. And the people who once took you for granted now feel that absence deeply. That's when they realize they didn't lose someone who was desperate for them. They lost someone who finally chose herself. Silence isn't about playing games. It's about changing the rules. It's about choosing yourself every time someone expects you to forget your worth. It's how you reset the balance, regain your power, and redirect your life. The loudest thing you can do in a world full of noise is to stand still and rise quietly. Not to be seen, not to be heard, but to be whole. And in that wholeness, everything else begins to shift. Your relationships, your mindset, your energy. People feel your growth even if you don't post about it. They feel your distance, your glow, your peace, and that impact, it's unstoppable. The biggest shift happens the moment you decide to stop focusing on them and start focusing on yourself. It sounds simple, but most people don't even realize how much of their emotional energy is wrapped around someone else. You check their social media, analyze their texts, wonder why they haven't called. You wake up thinking about them and go to bed with the same questions circling in your head. But here's the truth. None of that brings peace. None of that gives you power. It's a distraction disguised as connection. When you're constantly tuned in to someone else, you lose the signal from yourself, and you cannot grow in someone else's shadow. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. It means pulling your energy back from places where it's not being valued. It means saying, right now, my attention is going into my own life. Because when you center yourself, your clarity increases. You begin to notice the dreams you've neglected, the goals you've delayed, and the confidence you've outsourced to someone else. You start to take ownership, and that ownership is what makes you magnetic. People are drawn to someone who knows who they are, who doesn't need to chase, convince, or beg to be seen. You become radiant from within. And suddenly, you're not chasing anyone, they're watching you glow. Every time you put someone on a pedestal, you shrink your own worth. You measure your value by their attention, their approval, their affection. And when it's missing, you feel like something is wrong with you, but focusing on yourself flips that script. Instead of asking why they're distant, you ask why you're still waiting. Instead of wondering what they think of you, you ask what you think of them, and whether they truly deserve a seat in your life. That's not arrogance, that's awareness. When you refocus, you stop playing a role in someone else's story and start writing your own. And the more you write, the less you settle for chapters filled with confusion. Growth requires silence, solitude, and stillness, none of which can happen if your mind is consumed with someone else's behavior. When you shift your focus, you begin to notice how your energy was being used, how much of your power you were giving away in the form of overthinking, overgiving, and over-explaining. You see clearly the way you bent for people who wouldn't even lean. That clarity might hurt at first, but it sets you free. free to redirect all that energy inward, to heal, to rebuild, to dream again, and the best part, that internal shift creates external results. Your life starts to elevate in ways you didn't even expect. Focusing on yourself means becoming unavailable for anything that doesn't contribute to your peace. It's no longer about proving you're enough. It's about realizing you always were. That changes how you carry yourself. You stop chasing closure and start creating boundaries. You stop asking for reassurance and start reinforcing your standards. And here's what's powerful. When your energy changes, everything else follows. The wrong people fall away. The right people feel the difference because your focus says, I am whole with or without you. And wholeness is irresistible. It doesn't beg. It doesn't perform. It simply stands unshaken and unapologetic. You have to understand, your energy is currency. Where you spend it determines what grows. So if you keep pouring it into people who give you crumbs, you'll never feast. But when you pour it into your purpose, your health, your mind, your passions, everything changes. You start attracting people who match your frequency, not your wounds. You begin to rise, not because you're trying to get their attention, but because you're finally giving yourself yours. And that shift is not just felt by you, it's felt by everyone around you. Your glow becomes undeniable, your peace becomes noticeable, and your standards become non-negotiable. It's easy to make someone your focus when you don't know what you truly want. That's why focusing on yourself requires deep reflection. What excites you? What makes you feel alive? What kind of love do you actually deserve? What boundaries do you need to feel safe, valued, and respected? These are questions only you can answer. And when you do, your life becomes tailored to your truth, not someone else's convenience. You no longer settle for being chosen occasionally. You choose yourself consistently. That consistency builds a new reality, one where you don't chase people. You attract alignment. As you shift your focus inward, you might feel lonely at first. That's normal. You're breaking old patterns, releasing old habits, letting go of false connections. But that space you create, it becomes fertile ground. It's where your confidence grows, where your passions resurface, where your inner voice gets louder, and soon you'll look back and realize you weren't losing people. You were gaining yourself. You were no longer tolerating the bare minimum. You were rising into your highest self. And the ones who were meant for you, they'll rise to meet you there, not ask you to lower yourself again. There's a quiet power in minding your own evolution. While they're watching, testing, and waiting for a reaction, you're building. You're learning new skills, pursuing your dreams, creating the life they once thought you couldn't have without them. And ironically, the more you focus on yourself, the more they start to focus on you. But by then, your world is so full that their presence is optional, not necessary, because your validation doesn't come from their attention anymore. It comes from your own growth. Your days are fuller. Your peace is deeper. Your joy is no longer dependent on someone else's presence. When you truly focus on yourself, you stop asking, why don't they see my worth? Because you've already seen it. You've chosen to honor it. And the moment you do, you stop settling for anything less. You realize that the right connection will not require you to lose yourself to keep it. You understand that silence is better than begging. Space is better than chasing. Self-respect is better than temporary affection. You no longer fear walking away. In fact, you're more afraid of staying where you're not growing. And so, without fanfare or drama, you return to yourself. And everything else falls into place from there. Growth doesn't happen in noise. It doesn't happen when you're constantly explaining, defending, or reacting. It happens in the quiet moments, the ones no one else sees. That's where real transformation begins. When you go silent, you remove the distractions that keep you tied to old patterns. You create space to actually feel your emotions without judgment, to face your wounds without performing strength for others. It's in that silence that you meet your true self, the version of you that doesn't need anyone's approval. You begin to notice your triggers, your habits, your inner voice, and as that awareness deepens, so does your power. We're taught to show our progress to be validated, post it, prove it, announce it, but the most powerful growth doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need likes or attention. It just needs commitment and consistency. When you heal in silence, you build a kind of strength that doesn't crumble when someone walks away. You no longer need people to see you rebuilding because you've already seen it for yourself. And in that quiet process, you start to love yourself more deeply. Not for how you look, not for how others react to you, but for how far you've come when no one was watching. That's real self-worth. The results of silent growth speak for themselves. People start noticing something's different about you, even if you haven't said a word. They sense it in the way you carry yourself, in your peace, your clarity, your energy. You're no longer triggered by what used to throw you off balance. You don't over-explain. You don't overreact. You simply observe, reflect, and decide from a place of calm. That's the strength silence builds. It makes your decisions more powerful, your presence more intentional, and the best part, those who once took you for granted start wondering what changed. But by then, you're no longer waiting to be understood. There's a confidence that grows when you stop looking outward for direction. You begin to trust your intuition more because you've taken the time to hear it. When you're constantly in conversation or conflict, you drown out that inner voice. But silence sharpens your insight. You learn what peace actually feels like, and you start to protect it fiercely. You no longer react just to be heard. You pause, you observe, and then you choose what's worth your energy. That's emotional intelligence, that's maturity, and it shows. Not in what you say, but in what you no longer need to say. Your restraint becomes your power. People expect noise when someone is hurt. They expect a response, a reaction, a breakdown. So when you go silent, it disrupts their expectations. That silence becomes powerful, not because it's a game, but because it's a declaration. It says, I've outgrown this conversation. It says, I don't owe anyone my peace, and it creates a boundary without needing confrontation. In that space, you protect yourself from further emotional harm. You choose healing over chaos, and that kind of choice makes people reflect on their own behavior. Your silence becomes a mirror, and many can't handle what they see in it. Healing in silence means you don't give people access to your wounds while they're still open. You learn to stop bleeding for those who never intended to help you heal. Instead, you give yourself the care and patience you were offering to everyone else. You sit with your pain without needing someone else to validate it. And as time passes, you start to rebuild, not because they came back, not because you proved anything, but because you finally prioritized you. That internal work changes your external reality. You become more grounded, more self-aware, and more at peace, and no one has to see it for it to be real. Silent growth also teaches you discernment. You learn the difference between people who genuinely care and those who only show up when it benefits them. You stop oversharing with those who have proven they can't hold your vulnerability with care. You stop explaining your standards to people who are never going to meet them. That silence becomes your filter. It protects your energy and elevates your circle, and in that elevation, your standards rise. You no longer feel bad for expecting more because you've spent time becoming more. That's the shift that turns pain into power and heartbreak into healing. As you grow in silence, you begin to release the need to be chosen. You stop measuring your worth by how much someone wants to keep you. You choose yourself day after day, even when it's lonely, even when it's hard. And that choice becomes the foundation for everything else. Your self-esteem doesn't depend on someone texting you back. Your self-worth doesn't depend on their attention. You know what you bring to the table, and more importantly, you're not afraid to eat alone. That kind of confidence is rare, and people feel it the moment they lose access to the version of you that once overgave. When you build in silence, the transformation catches people off guard. They're used to the version of you who tolerated less, who stayed silent out of fear, not strength. But this new silence isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about no longer entertaining it. You don't need to prove your growth. You don't need to convince anyone you've changed. Your actions, your energy, your peace, they do the talking for you. And that quiet strength becomes undeniable. The ones who once took you for granted now feel the distance. The ones who once expected your attention now feel your absence. But you just keep growing. There's beauty in letting the world wonder what's happening with you, because behind the scenes you're evolving, you're creating, healing, learning, rising, and there's no pressure to be perfect while you do it. You're not performing, you're not rushing, you're just showing up for yourself every day. That consistency, that dedication, it's what builds unshakable self-respect, and one day the results of that quiet effort will speak louder than anything you could have said. People won't recognize you, but you'll recognize yourself. And in that moment, you'll realize the silence wasn't empty. It was everything you needed to become who you were always meant to be. When you finally pull your energy back and stop chasing people, something incredible happens. Your value begins to rise. Not because you're playing games or trying to manipulate anyone, but because you've shifted the power dynamic. You're no longer handing over your worth in exchange for someone else's attention. Instead, you're saying, I know who I am, and I don't need to beg for what's already mine. That kind of confidence is magnetic. When you stop showing up for someone who doesn't show up for you, they start to feel your absence. And in that absence, they begin to realize everything you brought to the table. Distance creates clarity, and your silence becomes unforgettable. People don't miss the noise you used to make. They miss the peace you used to bring. When you focus on yourself and stay silent, you remove yourself from the cycle of over-explaining, over-giving, and overcompensating. You create space for people to sit with the consequences of their choices, and that's when the shift begins. They start to notice the difference between your presence and your absence. They start to realize how much energy, love, and effort you were quietly pouring in. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's deeply felt. Your silence makes them confront their own behavior, and often it's the first time they truly see your value. Chasing someone sends a message that they are the prize and you are just hoping to be picked. But when you stop chasing, you reclaim that narrative. You become the one who chooses. You become the one with options. That change in energy is powerful. Suddenly, people who once ignored you are watching you. People who once felt comfortable keeping you on the back burner start to panic because they realize they're no longer in control. They can no longer rely on your attention, your forgiveness, or your presence. And when someone realizes you've stopped chasing, it forces them to ask, did I lose something I'll never get back? Your absence teaches lessons your words never could. You could write paragraphs explaining how hurt you are, how much you care, or how much they've lost. But nothing hits harder than silence. Silence says, I'm not fighting for someone who won't fight for me. Silence says, you had access to me and you wasted it. And suddenly, you go from predictable to powerful. You go from being the one who always reaches out to the one they can't reach. That emotional shift changes everything. They start to feel the loss in a way that words could never deliver. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's presence with boundaries. When you stop chasing, you give someone the opportunity to meet you halfway. If they don't, you've got your answer. But if they do, it's because they made the effort, not because you dragged them there. That's the difference between being wanted and being tolerated. People show you their priorities through their actions, not their words. And when your energy is no longer chasing, they either rise to the occasion or fade out of your life. Either way, you win because you're no longer trying to prove your worth, you're honoring it, and the people who are meant to be in your life will never ask you to abandon that. Pulling your energy back also gives you perspective. When you're caught up in chasing someone, your vision is clouded. You overlook red flags. You shrink yourself to be accepted. You justify poor treatment because you're afraid of being alone. But once you step back, you begin to see things clearly. You see how much of yourself you were giving away for the bare minimum in return. You start to ask better questions. What do I truly need? Who makes me feel safe, seen, and supported? And suddenly, your standards rise. Not out of bitterness, but out of growth. You stop settling because you've finally remembered what you deserve. There's nothing more attractive than someone who knows their worth and doesn't need to prove it. When you stop chasing, you radiate that energy. You're not cold. You're just clear. You're not distant. You're just discerning. You understand that not everyone deserves access to your time, energy, or heart. And you no longer feel guilty for protecting those things. That inner confidence shows in everything you do, in your walk, your tone, your choices. People feel it. They respect it. And those who once overlooked you begin to see you in a different light. Not because you changed who you are, but because you finally stopped dimming your light for them. In a world full of people begging to be noticed, the one who stands still becomes unforgettable. Silence is rare. Detachment is rare. Self-respect is rare. And when someone sees you embody all three, it wakes something up in them. They start to realize what they had when they had you. They remember how it felt to be loved by someone who expected nothing but honesty and effort. And if they have any depth at all, they'll regret not meeting you where you stood. That regret doesn't come because you said something. It comes because you said nothing. You just walked away with dignity and let your absence speak for itself. Letting go of the chase doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to stop bleeding for people who don't know how to bandage wounds. It means you're not abandoning love. You're just refusing to beg for it. And that kind of self-respect forces others to rise or fall away. Either way, it creates space for something better. Not just better people, but a better version of you. One who is no longer afraid of silence, distance, or solitude. One who knows that love isn't about chasing, it's about choosing, and if they don't choose you, you're strong enough to keep walking. Your energy is a gift, not a guarantee. When you stop giving it away so freely, people start to earn it. And in that process, you attract more than just romantic attention. You attract respect. You attract people who match your effort, your values, your integrity. People who don't run when things get quiet. People who know how to communicate, show up, and love deeply. And that shift doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you decided that your peace, your purpose, and your self-worth are non-negotiable. You didn't have to yell. You didn't have to chase. You just had to stand still and let everything fall into place